Daemon X Machina is a game from Marvelous that is heavily inspired by Armored Core. So, you're going to take a mech, customize it to your liking with all sorts of fun weapons, then take it into combat against enemy AI, which are quite easy, and enemy arsenals, basically the equivalent of Armored Cores, which are far more difficult. All while a dystopic sci fi narrative plays out where all the corporations, or in this case consortiums, are fighting each other, you're just a cog in a machine, stuff's going on, and maybe you'll even get to transcend humanity. Yep, there's a lot here that should be familiar if you played pretty much any sci-fi mech game. And ultimately, it doesn't always land. On the one hand, I found the unhinged dialogue from the characters absolutely hilarious. If I got out of a mission briefing without at least one person threatening to kill me, I figured something was seriously about to go wrong. On the other hand, the combat does end up feeling pretty repetitive, and while there were deep customization systems to engage with, I mostly didn't because I found that the random weapons that I happened to put on based on how cool they looked tended to work pretty well. So, this is a mixed bag, but if you're in the mood for some Armored Core we have at home, then Daemon X Machina could be a good time, just don't take it too seriously. So let's start by taking a look at arsenal customization. This can be done in the hangar, which is either accessible through the main hub or at the start of every mission. So you've got a head. This generally determines your lock-on range and also has a significant effect on durability. So I was struggling a little bit with the last boss, so I swapped something with a bit more durability. Though in general, you do want to equip things with attachments. Think of these as extra effects and customization that are primarily unlocked from bosses. Then you've got chest piece. This determines flight speed and also durability. Processor, bunch of extra special effects. Right and left arms. This is important because some arms have more specialization for a certain weapon type or distance. As you can see, the Fluorescence Dominion that I'm currently using has 97 fire rate support, which is a pretty decent number. It's like upper mid-range, like lighter armor can go up to 130-ish, but it also specializes in long-distance shooting. And so I put my long-range weapons in my mech's right hand. Then for my left hand, currently I am using a light armor piece that is specialized for melee because a couple times I ran out of ammo and I ended up swapping to a laser sword. Last up, you've got legs, which again, I was using a higher durability one, but I tended to like these because they're really fast. Durability's not great though, and I was feeling swishy, so swap to something else temporarily. Again, if you're going to use a piece of gear for a long time, put attachments in it. Now, weapons themselves, divided into categories. Bullets, pretty much what you'd expect. Laser weapons use femto, think that as energy. Melee, it depends. For a while I was using a big smashy smash mace. Also, is a long distance sword, and there's even a laser sword that consumes femto but does pretty good damage. Oh, and you can even use a shield or use some special weapons that do things like acid stuff. And so in short, your goal here is to build a loadout that counters the enemy. That also means if you fail a mission, that's a good time to swap up your weaponry, as you might just be missing that little bit of oomph to get you through. Which of course leads to the question of, how do you get weapons? Well, one way to get them is buying them in the shop, but that's boring. In general, I did not do very much of buying weapons in the shop, because it's much more interesting to go around, defeat enemy arsenals, and then scavenge weapons off of their corpses. Which is especially fun when you fight a named character that has some sort of special move or a really cool weapon, and you get to scavenge that very same weapon off of them after you beat them in combat. I quite like this system, and I enjoyed spending a lot of time scavenging. Now, there's also the factory system. So, the way the factory works is it allows you to convert one weapon into another weapon by spending some credits, provided you have a recipe. So for example, if I want the HA X BL12 Excalibur, then all I need is a HA BL07 Noble Pride and 17,000 credits. As you play through the game, and especially as you end up fighting a bunch of bosses, you get more recipes to make more cool shit. It does take a little bit of time though, so you're going to want to do a mission in the meantime. Also, as you may have noticed from the way I was navigating stuff, Daemon X Machina is very much a menu game. You're going to spend a lot of times in menus, and they aren't really made for a mouse. You kind of don't click much, you just use the arrow keys or your controller. That said, the game does play pretty well on keyboard and mouse, surprisingly. Now, in addition, there is one more customization system. This is done at the lab, where you get all sorts of enhancements to your character, some of which actually benefit your arsenal, some of which benefit your character directly when you're outside the mech. Here's the thing, these aren't just stat sheet stuff. Some of them have a very specific impact on your character's appearance. So here, for example, your character's entire torso is going to get mechanized. let's put this on for a second, and there you can see I am now a cyborg. I'm just a full-on cyborg. I have given up most of my humanity, if not all of it, to become the ultimate weapon. But hey, my weapons now reload 25% faster, totally worth it. Personally, I feel this is a bit of an homage to a system in Armored Core, where if you failed too much, your body would start to get replaced as you were experimented on, because who doesn't want to get experimented on by corporations if they don't do their job well enough and go into debt? Yeah, okay, maybe that sounds a little bit too real for a sci-fi fantasy game.
What am I even looking at? Your sizes. Vegan class? Oh man. You sure we're not in over our heads here?
Mission update. Sky Union has notified us of a change to this mission. You are to stop these immortals from advancing further into Sky Union's territory.
What? You've got to be kidding me!
And so, those are the basics of arsenal construction and customization. In general, I used whatever weapons looked cool, and that mostly worked out for me. I'm sure my damage was far from optimal, but as long as I generally stayed within a decent range for my weapon, like far away for long-range stuff, close up for close-range stuff, it worked totally fine, and I didn't find the game to be super difficult, though, like with all things difficulty, your mileage may vary. I say I didn't find it difficult. In comparison to, say, Armored Core 6, you might find it quite hard, and you know what? If you do, please share your experiences down in the comments below. As such, I viewed the customization more about just doing cool, fun stuff, and you know what? It was pretty darn good for that, especially using the factory to upgrade a bunch of items. But even the coolest build doesn't matter if you don't get to put it to the test. So, how does combat work in Daemon X Machina? Well, you begin each mission, there's a briefing, after which you're thrown directly into the combat zone and given an objective. If this objective is kill the rogue AIs, it's probably going to be a very easy mission. Quite a few of the missions at the start of the game are like this. Usually some twist or additional goal gets added on later, because the rogue AIs are little more than cannon fodder. You can just lock on with a bunch of missiles, blast them out of a sky of weapons, or cuff them up with your favorite melee weapon of choice. Now, one thing the game does well is it puts a big emphasis on vertical movement. Arsenals can hover for an unlimited amount of time without using any energy or boost. You need to use the boost to move more quickly, and you need to use the femto energy either to power energy weapons or for specific augments, which I will cover in a minute. There are quite a lot of battles against other Arsenal pilots, and this is where the game's combat really does well, because they have a toolset that's very similar to yours. In fact, in a lot of cases, you can literally knock them out and scavenge the weapons they were using from their arsenal, and then you just have that weapon. There's also some very cool things like a clash mechanic where if you're using a melee weapon and you charge and hit someone, they're also using a melee weapon, they're trying to hit you. Blades lock, you have to do a little QTE thing. One thing I found quite interesting, while it was much easier for me to avoid damage while in the air, it was actually easier for me to deal damage while on the ground. I think this is because if I'm in the air, the enemy pilot is also in the air, whereas if I'm on the ground, they're more likely to land, and I can generally get a target lock, or I can fire an explosive weapon directly at their feet, and the splash damage is probably going to hit them. Really good for evasive enemies. The one place where combat disappointed me, though, was against the game's bosses, because, again, coming from the Armored Core series, I was expecting bosses to be the highlight, and they really weren't. The game doesn't have very many of them. They basically appear every time you clear a rank. Most of them are really simple. They have armored panels. You shoot the armored panels off. There's a core beneath. You shoot the core for massive damage. And they have like one gimmick. The first boss jumps on you. The second boss, I actually forget what the second boss does. Oh, right, that was the giant laser ship. The third boss turns into a snake and moves its cores around. The fourth boss is an underground thing, and the fifth boss just has infinite lasers because it's the game's final boss. And you know what? I might have even forgotten something in there because they were kind of forgettable. But luckily, most missions were about taking on enemy AI, learning about the story, or fighting off against other arsenals. So there were quite a bit of fun times to be had. That said, let's go over a few more things about the basics of combat and how to control an arsenal. And for this part, I'm just going to hop into a mission and do a little bit of a live demonstration. Alright, so here we have combat. This is very much an aerial combat game, and by that I mean there is no energy cost or cost at all to just hovering infinitely in the air. The cost comes in when you boost, which allows you to move faster, evade enemy fire, or potentially rockets. The only downside being, when you run out of stamina, as I'm going to demonstrate here, you will then be unable to boost for a bit. like so. Then you get the warning, and there you go. Down to Earth. Now, unfortunately, there is another way to get knocked down to Earth, and that is hitting the top of a level, which, this being an aerial game, and especially when I was fighting against enemy arsenals, I did way too much. Next up, you might notice a whole bunch of symbols and all that below the stamina bar. On the left side, you have all the different arsenal parts. These can be damaged depending on the direct hits that you take. Now, on the right side, you have the femto bar. This is used for a few different things, such as offensive boost. So as you can see, I hit for like 20, 30, and now all of a sudden I hit harder. Activating the offensive boost doubles your damage, but causes you to take increased damage. Then there's speed boost, which when active means you can boost without actually spending stamina. Last up is defensive boost. Defensive boost helps protect against some of the hits you take, though it's not always the best if you're getting hit by a ton of boss attacks. Now, the last thing you can do with femto, the energy bar on the right, is the Mirage system. When you use the Mirage system, it creates a clone of your character. This clone is incredibly powerful. Not only does it have pretty good AI, at least relative to the enemies, but also it doesn't use ammo. So you're not going to be spending extra resources except for the femto, which regenerates over time, or you can fly your way into a femto zone to regenerate femto even more quickly. So that's the basics of combat, and it mostly works pretty well.
Oh, hell.
I don't want any trouble, but you know we can't just back down. We have to see this mission through.
The existence of potential. The potential of existence. Words unravel, becoming threads once more.
The story is pretty standard sci-fi fare. A giant explosion caused a chunk of a moon to land on the Earth. The chunk of the moon is full of this red ore called femto. The femto is changing humanity, so you've now got this system that keeps the femto away from people, but the femto is causing new technology. Some people want the femto, the corporations are all fighting. Yeah, if you've heard it once, you've probably heard it a million times. What makes things a little bit more interesting, or at the very least, more entertaining, is the fact that all of the characters are completely unhinged. For example, you have the leader of the Five Hells, Savior of House Valentine. Yes, that is his actual name, and he is just as pretentious as that would imply. Or you have Western Seven, criminals who are fulfilling their life sentences, or significantly longer than life sentences, by going on missions, and also committing way more crimes because, might as well at that point. You've already got 400 years on your sentence. Bulletworks, the rather standard Merc Corp, or at the very least, standard by comparison. Terrors, yeah, you can kind of get their whole vibe from their name. Panzer Crown, all sorts of weird and wacky mercs for you to interact with throughout the story. Ultimately, I don't think it's a great story. The writing's pretty shallow. Most of the characters are just a big old bundle of tropes. But personally, I enjoyed the ride, and I just thought of the game as some dumb fun. So what's the verdict? Personally, I'd put it in the buy it on sale category. Because yeah, there's definitely some fun to be had here, and the game's runtime was about 15 hours minus doing some extra side missions. Also, don't go into it expecting everything to be super serious. If you do, you're probably going to be disappointed. That said, even though it's only 15 hours, I did find some of the missions started to get repetitive. There's a point towards the middle where they just don't change things up all that much. Also, I suspect that some people, especially those who don't watch anime, are going to find the story to be a bit on the cringe side. If you don't like anime, you're probably not going to like this story. This story is very anime, both in the fucking awesome giant robot fights, and also in the, these characters are way too into themselves way. Some of the good, some of the bad. But with that said, there aren't a wealth of mech games to pick from, so if you've already played all the Armored Core games, and you just want some more mech battles, you could definitely do a lot worse than trying Daemon X Machina. With that said, if you haven't already played Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon, go play that instead. It is a much better game. The combat does not even compare, the bosses are incredible, and the story is way better. If you want to see more of my thoughts on that and many other titles, a link to my Steam Curator page is down in the description. Also, get subscribed. I talk about a lot of the games I play, and for quite a few, I will have a review. With that said, I'm going to get going for now. So, something else that YouTube thinks you're going to be interested in should be on screen right now. And with that, thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.